Picture this, your heart's racing, palms sweaty, and your stomach's doing somersaults. You know you need to have that conversation, the one you've been dodging for days, maybe weeks, the one that feels like walking into a lion's den wearing a meat suit. Pause, grin sound familiar. Now, what if I told you that conversation doesn't have to feel like a high stakes showdown, that you can flip the script, lower the tension, and walk away feeling like a communication ninja? Today, I'm sharing 3 game-changing strategies to turn any difficult conversation into easy mode. Let's dive in. Empathy is the cornerstone of transforming difficult conversations into moments of connection and understanding. When we talk about leading with empathy to lower defenses, we're not just suggesting a feel-good tactic. We're advocating for a fundamental shift in how we approach human interaction, especially when the stakes feel high. Imagine you're about to confront a colleague who's been missing deadlines, or perhaps you need to address a sensitive issue with a loved one. The instinct is often to dive in with facts, criticisms, or even accusations, but this approach can backfire, building walls instead of bridges. Leading with empathy flips this dynamic, creating a safe space where defenses come down and real dialogue can begin. It's about seeing the other person not as an opponent, but as a human with their own struggles, fears, and perspectives. This conclusion explores why empathy is so powerful, how IT works in practice, and why it's the key to making tough conversations feel like a walk in the park rather than a battle. At its core, empathy is about stepping into someone else's shoes, not just to guess what they're feeling, but to genuinely understand their emotional landscape. When you lead with empathy, you signal to the other person that you're not here to attack or judge, but to connect. This is critical because difficult conversations often trigger a fight response. The brain's amygdala, that ancient alarm system, lights up when someone feels criticized or cornered, making them defensive or withdrawn. Empathy acts like a soothing balm, calming that alarm and opening the door to productive dialogue. For example, consider a scenario where you need to address a friend who's been distant. Instead of saying, "Why are you ignoring me?" which might make them feel accused, you could say, "I've noticed we haven't talked much lately, and I'm wondering if everything's okay on your end." That simple shift shows you care about their experience, not just your own agenda. It's like extending a hand instead of pointing a finger. Empathy works because IT builds trust, and trust is the foundation of any meaningful conversation. When people feel understood, they're more likely to lower their guard and engage openly. This isn't just a psychological hunch, it's backed by research. Studies in organizational behavior, like those from the Greater Good Science Center, show that empathetic communication increases cooperation and reduces conflict in workplace settings. In personal relationships, too, empathy fosters closeness. A 2019 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that partners who perceived empathy from each other reported higher satisfaction and lower conflict. By leading with empathy, you're not just diffusing tension. You're laying the groundwork for a conversation that can lead to real solutions. In practice, leading with empathy means starting with a mindset of curiosity. Before you even open your mouth, take a moment to ask yourself, what might this person be going through? Are they stressed about work? Worried about something personal? Feeling insecure? This mental exercise isn't about making excuses for their behavior. It's about understanding the context that shapes IT. For instance, if you're a manager addressing an employee's poor performance, consider what's happening in their world. Maybe they're juggling family responsibilities or struggling with burnout. By starting the conversation with, "I can see you've been under a lot of pressure lately. How are you holding up?" You show you're attuned to their reality. This doesn't mean you avoid the issue. IT means you approach IT as a partner, not a prosecutor. The beauty of empathy is that it's not about agreeing with the other person or letting them off the hook. You can still hold people accountable while showing you understand their perspective. Take a parent addressing a teenager who's been skipping chores, instead of saying, "You're so lazy." You might say, "I know school and friends are keeping you busy, and it's tough to stay on top of everything. Let's figure out how we can make the chore routine work for you. This approach doesn't excuse the behavior, but IT acknowledges the teenager's reality, making them more likely to engage rather than shut down. Empathy creates a collaborative vibe, turning UVS, me, into USVS, the problem. One common misconception is that empathy requires you to be soft or overly emotional. Not true. Empathy can be direct and firm. It's about tone and intent, not watering down your message. For example, in a business setting, you might need to tell a client they've missed a payment. Instead of a cold, "You haven't paid us," try, "I understand things can get hectic, but I noticed we haven't received the latest payment. Can we sort this out together?" You're still addressing the issue head on, but you're doing IT in a way that respects their dignity. This balance of clarity and compassion is what makes empathy so powerful. It keeps the conversation moving forward without triggering defensiveness. Another key aspect of leading with empathy is active listening. It's not enough to say the right words, you have to show you're truly hearing the other person. This means resisting the urge to interrupt or plan your response while they're talking. Instead, nod, maintain eye contact, and reflect back what you hear. For example, if a coworker says, "I'm swamped and can't keep up," you might respond, "IT sounds like you're feeling really overwhelmed right now." This simple act of reflecting validates their emotions, making them feel seen and understood. Research from the Harvard Business Review shows that active listening can de-escalate conflict and build rapport, even in heated situations. It's like giving the other person a psychological hug. They feel safe enough to open up. Empathy also requires self-awareness. You can't lead with empathy if you're unaware of your own emotions or biases. If you're angry or frustrated going into a conversation, those feelings can leak out, no matter how carefully you choose your words. Before a tough talk, check in with yourself. Are you feeling defensive, anxious? Take a few deep breaths or jot down your thoughts to clear your head. This self-regulation ensures you can approach the conversation with genuine curiosity and openness, rather than letting your emotions hijack the moment. Of course, empathy isn't a magic wand. Some conversations will still be tough, and some people may stay defensive, no matter how empathetic you are. But even in those cases, leading with empathy sets a positive tone and increases the odds of a constructive outcome. It's like planting a seed. You may not see immediate results, but you're creating the conditions for growth. Over time, this approach builds stronger relationships, whether with colleagues, friends, or family. People remember how you made them feel, and empathy makes them feel valued, even in disagreement. To put this into action, try this simple exercise before your next difficult conversation. Write down one sentence that shows you understand the other person's perspective. For example, "I can see this project has been a lot to handle with everything else going on." Practice saying IT out loud so IT feels natural. Then, when the moment comes, lead with that sentence. You'll be amazed at how IT shifts the energy, making the conversation feel less like a confrontation and more like a collaboration. In a world where misunderstandings and conflicts are all too common, leading with empathy is a superpower. It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about showing up as a human who cares about another human's experience. By starting with empathy, you create a space where defenses drop, trust grows, and real solutions emerge. So the next time you're facing a tough talk, don't dread IT. Embrace IT as an opportunity to connect, to understand, and to build something better together. You've got the tools to make IT happen. Now go out there and turn those difficult conversations into moments of growth and connection. Asking open-ended questions to foster collaboration is a transformative strategy that can turn a potentially contentious conversation into a constructive dialogue. When we face difficult conversations, whether addressing a colleague's mistake, navigating a disagreement with a partner, or resolving a conflict with a friend, our instinct is often to assert our perspective, lay out the facts, or even point fingers. This approach, however, tends to shut people down, making them defensive or disengaged. By contrast, asking open-ended questions invites the other person into the conversation, giving them space to share their thoughts and feelings without feeling judged. This simple yet powerful technique shifts the dynamic from confrontation to collaboration, creating an environment where both parties feel heard and invested in finding a solution. This conclusion delves into why open-ended questions are so effective, how to use them skillfully, and why they're a game changer for making tough talks feel effortless and productive. The magic of open-ended questions lies in their ability to open doors rather than close them. Unlike closed questions, those that elicit a yes, no, or one-word answer, open-ended questions encourage the other person to elaborate, reflect, and share. They signal curiosity and respect, showing that you value the other person's perspective. For instance, imagine you're addressing a team member who's been arriving late to meetings. Instead of saying, "Why can't you be on time?" which can feel accusatory, you might ask, "What's been making IT tough to get to our meetings on time lately?" This question does two things. IT acknowledges that there might be valid reasons for their behavior, and IT invites them to share without putting them on the spot. The result? They're more likely to open up, and you gain insight that can lead to a solution. This collaborative approach is rooted in psychology. When people feel they have a voice in a conversation, they're more likely to engage constructively. Research from the field of organizational psychology, such as studies published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, shows that participative communication, where employees are invited to share their views, leads to higher engagement and better problem-solving outcomes. In personal relationships, too, open-ended questions build trust. A 2020 study in the Journal of Family Psychology found that couples who used open-ended questions during conflicts reported feeling more understood and were more likely to reach mutual resolutions. By asking questions that invite dialogue, you create a sense of partnership, turning a potential conflict into a shared journey toward understanding. Using open-ended questions effectively starts with intentionality. Before a tough conversation, take a moment to prepare a few questions that are genuinely curious and non-judgmental. The key is to avoid questions that sound like traps or veiled accusations. For example, "Why did you do that?" might seem open-ended, but it can feel like an interrogation. Instead, try, "Can you walk me through what happened from your perspective?" This phrasing is neutral and encourages storytelling, which helps you understand the other person's motivations and context. In a professional setting, if you're addressing a client who's unhappy with a deliverable, you might ask, "What specifically isn't meeting your expectations right now?" This not only clarifies their concerns, but also shows you're committed to addressing them collaboratively. Timing is also critical. Open-ended questions work best early in the conversation before tensions escalate. By starting with a question like, "How are you feeling about this situation?" you set a tone of openness and curiosity. This approach prevents the conversation from becoming a one-sided lecture, which often triggers defensiveness. For example, if you're discussing a strained friendship, you might begin with, "I've noticed things have felt a bit off between us. What's been going on for you?" This gives your friend a chance to share their side without feeling attacked, paving the way for a two-way dialogue. Another strength of open-ended questions is their ability to uncover hidden issues. Often the surface-level problem isn't the real issue. By asking, "What's been the toughest part of this for you?" you might discover underlying stressors or concerns that weren't immediately obvious. In a workplace scenario, if a colleague is underperforming, asking, "What challenges are you facing with this project?" might reveal they're struggling with unclear instructions or a lack of resources rather than a lack of effort. This insight allows you to address the root cause, not just the symptom, leading to more effective solutions. Open-ended questions also empower the other person to take ownership of the conversation. When you ask someone to share their thoughts, you're giving them agency, which can shift their mindset from defensive to proactive. For instance, if you're a parent talking to a teenager about their slipping grades, instead of saying, "You need to study more," you could ask, "What do you think is making it hard to keep up with schoolwork right now?" This invites them to reflect on their challenges and propose solutions, making them feel like a partner in problem solving rather than a target of criticism. This sense of agency can be incredibly motivating as IT taps into intrinsic desires to be heard and respected. Of course, asking open-ended questions is only half the equation. Listening to the answers is just as important. Active listening means giving the other person your full attention without interrupting or jumping to conclusions. Nod, maintain eye contact, and when appropriate, paraphrase what you hear to show you're engaged. For example, if a coworker says, "I'm just overwhelmed with all these deadlines," you might respond, "IT sounds like you're feeling really stretched thin right now." This reflection not only validates their feelings, but also keeps the conversation flowing. According to a 2021 article in the Harvard Business Review, active listening during tough conversations can reduce defensiveness and increase mutual understanding, even in high-stakes situations. One challenge with open-ended questions is knowing how to handle vague or evasive responses. If someone doesn't engage fully, don't push too hard. Instead, try a follow-up question like, "Can you tell me more about that?" Or "What's one thing that stands out for you?" These prompts gently encourage deeper sharing without being confrontational. If the conversation still stalls, it's okay to pivot to another strategy, like offering your own perspective in a collaborative way, such as, "Here's how I'm seeing things. Does that resonate with you at all?" Open-ended questions aren't a cure-all, and they require practice to master. Start small by incorporating 1 or 2 questions into your next tough conversation. Write them down beforehand to build confidence. Over time, you'll develop a knack for crafting questions that feel natural and elicit meaningful responses. The goal isn't to manipulate or control the conversation, but to create a space where both parties feel safe to share and explore solutions together. In a world where misunderstandings can escalate quickly, asking open-ended questions is like throwing a lifeline across a divide. IT transforms a potential battle into a shared exploration, fostering collaboration and mutual respect. By inviting others to share their story, you're not just diffusing tension, you're building stronger, more authentic connections. So, the next time you're staring down a difficult conversation, don't lead with statements or solutions. Instead, arm yourself with a few thoughtful questions, listen deeply, and watch how the dynamic shifts. You have the power to turn tough talks into opportunities for growth and understanding. Start asking, and see where the conversation takes you. Focusing on future solutions rather than past blame is a transformative approach that can turn even the most challenging conversations into opportunities for growth and collaboration. When we enter a difficult discussion, whether it's addressing a coworker's mistake, resolving a family dispute, or navigating a professional disagreement, the natural inclination is often to dwell on what went wrong and who's responsible. This backward-looking focus, however, tends to trap us in a cycle of defensiveness, resentment, and stalemate. By contrast, pivoting to future solutions shifts the energy from conflict to possibility, fostering a sense of shared purpose and forward momentum. This conclusion explores why focusing on the future is so effective, how to apply IT in practice, and why it's a critical strategy for making tough conversations not just manageable, but productive and empowering. The power of focusing on future solutions lies in its ability to reframe a conversation. When we fixate on past mistakes, we activate the other person's defenses. The brain's natural response to blame is to protect itself, either by shutting down or fighting back, which derails any chance of meaningful dialogue. A 2021 study in the Journal of Conflict Resolution found that conversations centered on blame are more likely to escalate conflict, while those focused on problem-solving lead to better outcomes. By directing the conversation toward what can be done next, you sidestep this defensive trap and create a collaborative atmosphere. For example, imagine you're addressing a team member who missed a critical deadline. Instead of saying, "You dropped the ball on this," you could ask, "How can we make sure we hit the next deadline?" This simple shift moves the focus from fault to action, inviting the other person to contribute ideas rather than justify their past. This approach is particularly effective because IT aligns with a fundamental human desire to feel capable and forward-moving. When you focus on solutions, you empower the other person to take ownership of the outcome, rather than feeling like a scolded child. In a personal context, Consider a situation where you're discussing a recurring argument with a partner about household responsibilities. Instead of rehashing who forgot to do the dishes last week, you might say, "What can we do to make sure we're both on the same page about chores going forward?" This question doesn't ignore the issue but frames IT as a problem to solve together, not a score to settle. It's like hitting the reset button, giving both parties a chance to move forward without carrying the weight of past grievances. Implementing a future-focused approach requires a deliberate mindset shift. Before a tough conversation, take a moment to clarify your goal. Are you trying to prove a point, or are you aiming to improve the situation? If it's the latter, prepare to steer the discussion toward actionable steps. For instance, if you're a manager addressing an employee's poor performance, you might be tempted to list their shortcomings. Instead, try saying, "Let's talk about what support you need to excel in this role moving forward." This not only addresses the issue, but also signals that you believe in their potential to improve. It's a subtle but powerful way to keep the conversation constructive. One key to making this strategy work is timing. The future-focused approach is most effective after you've acknowledged the other person's perspective. If you jump straight to solutions without validating their feelings, they may feel dismissed. For example, in a conversation with a friend who's been unreliable, you might first say, "I can see you've been really stretched thin lately," to show empathy. Then pivot to the future. What can we do to stay connected more consistently? This combination of empathy and forward thinking creates a safe space for collaboration, as the other person feels heard before being asked to problem solve. Another benefit of focusing on solutions is that it helps uncover shared goals, even in tense situations. In a professional setting, if you're negotiating with a client who's dissatisfied with a project, dwelling on what went wrong can lead to finger pointing. Instead, asking, "What would success look like for you on this project going forward?" aligns both parties toward a common objective. This approach taps into the principle of interest-based negotiation, where the focus is on mutual needs rather than opposing positions. A 2020 article in the Harvard Business Review highlights that solution-oriented discussions lead to higher satisfaction and stronger relationships, as they encourage both sides to invest in a positive outcome. Focusing on the future also requires letting go of the need to be right. This can be challenging, especially when you feel wronged or frustrated. However, insisting on assigning blame often comes at the cost of progress. For example, if you're addressing a sibling who borrowed money and hasn't repaid it, you might want to vent about their irresponsibility. Instead, try saying, "Let's figure out a plan that works for both of us to settle this." This doesn't mean you ignore the past. It means you prioritize resolution over retribution. By releasing the need to win, you create space for a conversation that benefits everyone. In practice, future-focused questions are your best tool. Questions like, "What can we do differently next time?" or "How can we make this work better?" invite collaboration and creativity. They also signal optimism, which can be contagious. In a study from the Journal of Positive Psychology 2019, researchers found that conversations framed with positive, future-oriented language increased participants' sense of hope and engagement. For instance, if you're addressing a teenager about their messy room, instead of saying, "Why can't you ever clean up?" try, "What's a system we could try to keep your space organized?" This not only addresses the issue, but also empowers them to take part in the solution. Of course, focusing on the future doesn't mean ignoring the past entirely. Acknowledging what happened can be important for building trust, but IT should be brief and constructive. For example, in a workplace conflict, you might say, "I know things got heated in our last meeting, and I'd like us to find a way to work together more smoothly going forward." This acknowledges the issue without dwelling on IT, keeping the conversation forward looking. One challenge is that some people may resist moving to solutions, especially if they're still caught up in emotions or blame. In these cases, patience is key. If the other person wants to vent, let them, but gently guide the conversation back to the future. You might say, "I hear how frustrating this has been. Let's talk about what we can do to make things better." If they persist in rehashing the past, stay calm and reiterate your focus on solutions like, I want to make sure we're both happy with how this goes moving forward. What do you think would help? To make this approach second nature, try this exercise. Before your next tough conversation, write down one future-focused question that aligns with your goal. Practice IT until IT feels natural. For example, if you're addressing a coworker's lack of communication, you might prepare, what can we do to keep each other in the loop more effectively? This small preparation can make a big difference in keeping the conversation productive. In a world where conflicts often spiral into blame and defensiveness, focusing on future solutions is like charting a new path through a storm. IT transforms difficult conversations into opportunities for growth, collaboration, and mutual respect. By letting go of the past and looking ahead, you create a space where both parties can thrive. So, the next time you face a tough talk, don't get stuck in what went wrong. Instead, ask what can go right, and watch how IT changes the game. You have the power to turn conflict into connection. Step into IT with confidence and a vision for a better tomorrow.